The Undertaker was a top superstar in WWE for 30 years, and in that time he worked with some of the greatest in-ring talent imaginable. From the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, to the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, to the Hitman Bret Hart and the Beast Brock Lesnar, the Dead Man had classic matches with these talents, but sadly over the years, the Dead Man has also worked with some talents that he regretted stepping in the ring with. Thanks to interviews and reports, we now know the 10 specific names that the Dead Man hated working with during his time in WWE, and whilst these opponents frustrated The Undertaker, he managed to try his best to remain professional. Well, for the most part that is. But which wrestlers were they? Well, join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at 10 wrestlers The Undertaker despised working with. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos, and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Also check out Wrestlelamia.co.uk and our non-wrestling channel, Incredible. Number 10. Chris Jericho. When Chris Jericho arrived in WWE in 1999, the Dead Man took an instant dislike to Jericho as he wasn't the biggest fan of his attitude. The issues between the two started when Jericho cut a promo which referred to The Undertaker as boring and claimed that he was negatively impacting ratings. The Dead Man felt that this was completely unprofessional, and a new star such as Chris Jericho shouldn't be disrespecting a veteran in this manner. The two eventually patched things up years later, and the Dead Man eventually earned the respect for Jericho and his character work. He even dropped the world title to Jericho at the Elimination Chamber in 2010 in one of the most memorable exchanges between the two celebrated performers. Number 9. Heidenreich. One of the more infamous feuds of the Ruthless Aggression era was the feud between The Undertaker and Heidenreich. The matches between the two were subpar, and it was clear that Heidenreich just wasn't ready for a top spot in the company. The Dead Man struggled to get a passable match out of him, and it was reported at the time that he was ready to move on by the time WWE were approaching Wrestlemania 21 in 2005. Heidenreich's performances were so poor during this time that Bruce Pritchard issued a public apology on his Something to Wrestle podcast that was directed towards the Dead Man. The apology stated,
Okay, I'm sorry, man. I got to take exception. Another example of being completely wrong. Those matches stunk to high heaven. They weren't really bad. They were awful. Well, they were worse than awful. I mean, if you saw that, it would take you weeks to get that stink out of your clothes. I would publicly like to say to The Undertaker, I'm sorry.
Number 8. Chris Kanyon. Now in 2003, during the feud between Taker and The Big Show, former WCW star Chris Kanyon appeared out of a giant box dressed as Boy George for a segment on SmackDown. This was when the Dead Man brutalized Kanyon with a vicious chair shot, which was so hard it gave Kanyon a severe concussion. At the time, it was believed that the Dead Man was taking liberties with Kanyon, and most fans speculated that this was related to Kanyon's sexuality, but this was never confirmed. The incident was brought up once again in 2022 after The Undertaker was inducted into the Hall of Fame, as Buff Bagwell took to Twitter to tweet, "Good speech by Undertaker. He talked a lot about respecting everyone, and all I could think was, how did he respect Kanyon, who he tried to behead him with that chair?" Number 7. Giant Gonzales. Giant Gonzales was without a doubt one of the worst in-ring talents that has ever stepped foot in a WWE ring. Taker was given the tough task in '93 to try and get him over, and the feud and subsequent matches between the two were total and utter train wrecks. The Dead Man would reflect on working with Gonzales during an interview on the Not Sam podcast and claimed that it was bad on so many levels. He mentioned, "Oh my, that was the worst. Hideous. That whole thing took years off my career. I'd be in much better shape now if I could have skipped that one program. As physically demanding as it was twice the mental strain because you got Brett's there, now Yoko is there. All these guys are going out there and having great matches, and obviously you want to be mentioned in the same breath with those guys, and it was just not possible. It was survival every night, just trying to figure out what he could do, and at that time, I didn't sell a lot and bump around, but man, I was flopping and just trying to make chicken salad out of chicken crap. It did help me, and it prepared me later on to be able to work with people, but I'd still sometimes wake up with cold sweats." Number 6. The Big Show. Whilst The Undertaker clearly had a ton of respect for The Big Show and saw his potential, this didn't mean that working with him was his favourite thing in the world. The two would work together during a ton of live events during the Attitude Era, and Taker was so unimpressed with The Big Show's efforts that he used to wait backstage to chew The Big Show out for his poor performances. According to Big Show, he claimed that he would never be able to impress the dead man, and it was clear that Taker was getting frustrated with working with his former tag team partner. Ultimately, the Big Show would show a vast improvement in the ring, and by the time the duo worked together in 2008, the two had much better matches that highlighted some of the best in-ring work of the Big Show's entire career. Number 5. Mabel. In 1995, WWE tried to make Mabel the next big heel in the company. But the issue was that Mabel's in-ring style was reckless, and he ended up injuring notable talents such as Diesel and the Phenom himself. This injury to the dead man would occur when Mabel injured the Undertaker's eye socket and forced him to wear a protective mask for a number of months. According to Mabel's former teammate Mo, the Undertaker was absolutely furious with Mabel after the incident, and the two got into a heated argument backstage. They did reconcile years later, as Mabel was selected to be part of the Ministry of Darkness under the brand new name of Viscera. This likely wouldn't have happened if there was still tension between the two. Number 4. Hulk Hogan. Survivor Series 1991 was a monumental night for The Undertaker. He would capture his first title by defeating Hulk Hogan, and it was a clear sign that The Undertaker character was going to be one of the biggest characters that the company had ever created. Taker would win the match by tombstoning Hogan on a chair, and according to Hogan, The Undertaker caused severe damage to his neck when the dead man performed a tombstone on him. This impacted the dead man's confidence, as he truly believed that he had injured Hogan. Taker took pride in being incredibly safe in the ring, and this accusation certainly damaged that reputation. But when Taker finally watched the match back, he realized that Hogan's head never even hit the chair, and this meant that Hogan had completely fabricated the claim that he had been injured. Taker confronted Hogan about this, and Hogan couldn't offer a logical explanation. It was clear to everyone that Hogan was outright lying out of fear that the dead man was becoming too popular, and Hogan was fearful that The Undertaker could potentially take his spot. Number 3. Diamond Dallas Page. When DDP joined WWE in 2001, he was thrown into an infamous feud with The Undertaker. This feud completely derailed DDP's popularity, and to this very day, it's still extremely frustrating to rewatch. It was reported that Taker hated working with DDP, so consequently the dead man gave the former WCW champion absolutely nothing in their feud. DDP never looked remotely credible as a threat to Taker, and he would even be pinned by The Undertaker's wife, Sarah. The reason for this was because DDP simply rubbed The Undertaker the wrong way backstage. Those who knew DDP knew he enjoyed planning out matches, and this deeply offended the dead man, who wasn't used to this style of working. It was also reported that DDP failed to feed The Undertaker's comeback at a house show, and this completely killed any chance of him becoming a top guy in the WWE. Now, according to DDP, the two are tight these days, but it's still unfortunate to look back at the wasted potential that was DDP in WWE, all thanks to The Undertaker. Number 2. Goldberg. Out of all the names The Undertaker has faced throughout his career, The Undertaker has never been in more danger in the ring than when he faced Goldberg in 2019. The two would face off at the Super Showdown pay-per-view, and the once dream match turned into a nightmare. Early on in the match, Goldberg went headfirst into the ring post, which resulted in a concussion. He then proceeded to drop The Undertaker right on his head following a jackhammer attempt in a move that could have seriously injured the wrestling legend. Taker then hit Goldberg with a tombstone, which spiked Goldberg right on his head before Goldberg attempted his own tombstone. However, he couldn't get Taker into the position, and they both awkwardly fell. Taker then proceeded to call an audible and finish the match off with a chokeslam. Taker was utterly ashamed of the performance, and he reflected on the match on the WWE Network series The Last Ride, and stated, "You got a wife and kids. I'm risking permanent injury? All that stuff comes flooding into your head after stuff like that happens, and I really needed to take an honest look at this and assess where I'm at. Is it me? Have I lost that big step? Are you the reason this stuff is happening? You've got all this stuff going on in your head. You've got this pain in your back and you really can't hardly move. It was tough for a while." And number 1, CM Punk. CM Punk was in the midst of a fantastic world title reign in 2009 when his reign came to an abrupt end at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. Punk would be defeated by The Undertaker, and the reason for Punk dropping the title was because the dead man used his backstage power to halt Punk's push. Taker took exception to the way Punk dressed, and the dead man believed that if Punk was going to be world champion, he would have to change the way he looked. Punk stood his ground though and refused to alter his appearance, and this resulted in falling out in favour with both WWE and the dead man himself. Although The Undertaker clearly had a dislike for Punk in 2009, the relationship between the two was amended in 2013 when the two would have an all-time classic match at Wrestlemania 29. But there you have it folks, 10 wrestlers The Undertaker despised working with. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.